I'm 92 years old. My neighbor Earl and I shared one fence for 40 years. For 22 of those years, we did not speak. Then the storm came.
His name was Walter Boone. Earl was the name everybody used because the man looked like an earl. Square shoulders, grey cap pulled low, jaw set like a locked gate, the kind of face that seemed carved out of weather and disapproval. Walter had lived next door since 1968. Same white clapboard house, same rusting mailbox, same vegetable patch out back with tomato stakes tied up straighter than church pews. He waved the first day. That part mattered. He was standing beside a Ford pickup with one dented door and a cracked tail light. Thomas Mercer had just moved in with his wife, Elaine, and their little girl, Beth. Boxes still in the driveway. Screen door still squeaking wrong. The whole yard smelled like wet cardboard and cut grass. Walter lifted 2 fingers off the steering wheel and nodded once. Thomas waved back. That was how it started. Not with friendship, not with supper invitations, not with borrowed tools and porch coffee, just a wave. In small places, that is often enough. They got along well enough at first, not close. Not the kind of neighbors who swapped keys or knew the exact date of each other's birthdays, but close enough to live side by side without effort. Walter kept to himself, Thomas kept busy. One mowed on Thursdays, the other on Saturdays. One liked the Cardinals, the other liked whoever was playing the Cardinals. They lent each other ordinary things. A ladder once, a socket wrench twice. A bag of ice during the summer, the power went out and both refrigerators started sweating. Elaine took over peach cobbler some Sundays. Walter returned the dish clean every time. Never a crumb, never a thank you note, just a clean dish on the porch rail by evening. That was his style. The years passed in the usual way. Mailbox conversations, weather complaints, a remark about taxes, a muttered opinion on the mayor. The sound of 2 lives happening 10 feet apart. Beth grew up. Elaine died. Walter's old hound died too. Then Thomas's son Michael moved away to Columbus and hardly came back except Christmas. And somewhere in the middle of all that living, one small foolish thing turned into 22 years of silence. It was the maple tree. Of course, it was something ridiculous. The tree stood right by the property line, thick trunk leaning a little west, roots probably crossing both yards, whether anybody liked it or not. Every October, it dumped a red gold avalanche across Walter's side first, then Thomas's, then everybody else's, if the wind felt ambitious. One Saturday, Walter came outside with a rake in one hand and a black lawn bag in the other. He looked over the fence and said, "That tree belongs to this side when the leaves fall." Thomas said, "The trunk says otherwise." Walter said, "The wind says otherwise." Thomas said, "Then take it up with the wind." That should have been the end of it. 2 men. One bad joke, a little grumbling, done by supper. But pride is a patient carpenter. It keeps building after common sense goes home. Walter raked every leaf back through the fence slats. Thomas saw the neat little red pile waiting by his tomatoes and raked it back. Walter came out an hour later and pushed it over again with the flat side of the rake. Elaine watched from the window and said, "Please tell that man this family will not be entering a leaf war." Thomas should have laughed, should have bagged the leaves and let the whole thing die where it began. Instead, he went outside and said, "If there is that much energy left in old age, maybe use it on something holy." Walter said, mind the property line and leave holiness to the preacher. That was the sentence. Not awful, not unforgettable, but sharp enough to give pride a place to live. From there, it got stupid fast. Walter measured the fence posts twice. Thomas bought brighter floodlights for the back porch, and one of them spilled across Walter's shed window all night. Walter called the county about a rain barrel he claimed was too close to the line. Thomas trimmed the maple branches hanging over Walter's yard, but only on his side, leaving the tree lopsided and ugly as a bad haircut. Walter nailed up a section of lattice for privacy. Thomas planted shrubs right against it. Both men started timing garbage cans so they would not have to meet at the curb. Both men learned the sound of the other's truck and stayed inside until it passed. Two grown men, widowers by then, 10 feet apart, building separate kingdoms out of resentment. And the saddest part was this. After a while, neither man needed the original offense anymore. The grudge became self-feeding. By the 5th year, the tree barely mattered. By the 10th, the tree was only a mascot. The real injury had changed shape. Now it was about tone, then principle, then memory, then the humiliation of being the one who gave in first. That is how foolishness matures in old age. It puts on a necktie and starts calling itself dignity. Beth noticed before anyone else. She came home one Thanksgiving with her own children and stood at the kitchen sink drying plates while Thomas scraped stuffing into a plastic tub. She said, "Still not speaking to Mr. Boone?" Thomas said, "No need." She said, 20 years seems like a long time for no need." He said, "Some things go bad and stay bad." Beth dried the same plate twice. That was what she did when something hurt her. Then she said, "Mom used to say the two of you were the same man in different jackets." Thomas turned too fast at that. No. But he knew what she meant. Walter had the same habits, same stiffness in the neck, same silence around hurt, same old country belief that once respect cracked, the only honorable response was distance. Elaine had seen it years before either man did. She used to stand on the porch with a basket of clothespins and say, "That neighbor next door is going to help bury you if pride gets there first." Thomas always answered the same way. That man would not cross the fence for a fire. The truth was harder. Neither would he. Then came the April storm. Not a postcard storm, not a soft movie rain with tasteful thunder in the distance. This one arrived green. The air turned the color of old bruises. Wind bent the power lines into long black question marks. Birds disappeared. The dog down the block howled once and then went quiet. Thomas was in the hallway with a flashlight and a radio that kept spitting static between warnings. The window above the stairs rattled like loose teeth. Outside, branches snapped one by one, then all at once. There is a sound a house makes when weather stops being weather and starts becoming force. A deep cracking groan, like something large changing its mind. The back windows blew inward first. Glass, rain, a picture frame knocked off the wall. The smell of insulation and mud and busted wood. Thomas got down low beside the washing machine and stayed there with his hands over his head, 90 years old and suddenly feeling 9. Then came the long roar. Not loud in the ordinary way. Worse than loud. Final. When it passed, silence hit the neighborhood so hard it sounded artificial. No sirens yet, no voices, just dripping water, and somewhere, far off, a car alarm wailing for no one. Thomas pushed open what was left of the back door. Half the maple was gone. The top of Walter's house was gone too. Not damaged. Gone. The living room stood open to the sky, like a dollhouse with its roof lifted off. Sofa soaked black, curtain rod dangling, one lamp somehow still upright beside a chair that no longer had a wall behind it. And in the middle of that ruin sat Walter Boone, still wearing the grey cap, hands on his knees, looking not frightened, not even broken, just finished. That was the moment pride finally looked ridiculous. Not wrong. Ridiculous. Because there sat a man 10 feet away, inside a room that was no longer inside anything. And 22 years of silence suddenly seemed like a hobby for fools. Thomas did not think long enough to ruin the moment. He went to the garage, grabbed the blue top from the winter shelves, grabbed the thermos Elaine used to take on road trips, filled it with coffee from the burner, though half the kitchen had water in it, found an old box of roofing nails and a hammer because hands need work when the heart is lagging behind. Then he walked across the yard, not around the fence, over the busted part where the maple had torn it down. Walter looked up once, said nothing. Thomas set the thermos on the wet floorboards, laid the tarp across the open section where rain still dripped through broken beams, and said the first words Walter had heard from him in 22 years. "Earl, does any part of this still seem worth it?" Walter stared at the missing roof, then at the fence scattered flat across both yards. Finally he said, "No." That was all. No speech, no sudden tears, no movie music from heaven, just one old man answering another with the plainest truth available. No. They worked until dark, not fast, not well. 2 90-year-old bodies and one half-collapsed house were never going to look heroic. But they worked. Walter held the ladder while Thomas climbed. Thomas hammered while Walter steadied the tarp. Then Walter sat down because his breathing went shallow, and Thomas pretended not to notice for 30 seconds, so the man could rest without being managed. They shared the coffee under a sky still spitting rain. At one point Walter said, "That tree was ugly." Thomas said, "The tree was innocent." Walter nodded. "That too." An hour later the sheriff came by, then county volunteers, then Beth with blankets and the kind of face daughters get when fear has been driving too long. She stepped out of the car, saw the 2 men together under one tarp, and stopped walking. Thomas had not seen that expression on her in years. Not surprise, relief, as if something in the world had quietly been put back where it belonged. Walter moved into Thomas's guest room for 6 weeks. That part would have sounded impossible the month before. It turned out grief and weather can rearrange a man faster than arguments ever could. The first few days were careful. Walter folded his clothes into exact squares. Thomas made too much toast and called it an accident. Both men spoke like strangers on a bus. But ordinary life has a talent for softening formality. By week 2, Walter was correcting the newspaper out loud again. By week 3, Thomas was saving the heel of the bread because Walter liked it toasted darker than common sense allowed. By week 4, they were sitting on the back steps at dusk arguing about baseball with the easy irritation of brothers who had lost too much time. And that was when the deeper shame arrived. Not the shame of the leaf war, not the fence, not the floodlight, or the county call, or the years of pretending a human being had become scenery. The deeper shame was this. Both men had been lonely the whole time. Walter admitted it first, though admission for him came disguised as complaint. One evening, he looked out over the wreck of his house and said, "Silence gets loud after sunset." Thomas said, "Yes." Walter said, "That all?" Thomas said, "That is enough." It was, because some truths do not need polishing. They only need company. Later that month, Beth found the old photo. It had slipped behind the hall table years before. A faded Polaroid from 1972. Two younger men standing by that same fence, each holding one end of a stringer full of crappie. Shirt sleeves rolled up, grinning like the day had been invented for them. Walter took one look and said, "Well, now that is offensive." Thomas laughed so hard he had to sit down. The sound startled both of them. It had been that long since the bitterness cracked open enough to let humor through. Beth set the photo on the mantel. No ceremony, no speech. But it stayed there. A witness. Proof that the silence had not always been there. Proof that the feud was built, not born. And anything built can, under the right pressure, be taken apart. When Walter finally moved back into his repaired house, the fence did not go back up the same way. A few sections, yes. Property lines still existed. Tomato patches still needed keeping. Dogs from down the block still respected nothing. But the middle stretch stayed lower. Not symbolic in any grand way, just practical. Lower wood, wider sightline, easier to lean on and say good morning. That was enough symbolism for two men who had wasted decades inventing stronger barriers. The last conversation between them happened in November, 3 years after the storm. Cold morning, thin frost on the grass, sound of a rake dragging leaves into a pile. Walter stood on his side of the fence and said, "Funny thing." Thomas said, "That would be a first." Walter ignored that. Then he said, "Cannot remember what the first insult was." Thomas rested both hands on the rake handle. Nor can anyone else, probably. Walter scraped one boot in the leaves. Then came the sentence that stayed. "Can remember the day the waving stopped." That is what old age does to memory when pride has been wasting it. The details rot first. The injury stays, not the offense, just the place where warmth used to be. Walter died the following winter. Pneumonia. Quick. Almost rude in how fast it happened. At the funeral, Beth stood beside Thomas in a church basement that smelled like percolated coffee and sheet cake icing. She touched his sleeve and said, "Those last years mattered." Thomas nodded. But later, alone in the yard, looking at the low middle section of fence and the bare place where the maple used to throw its shade, another truth settled in. Those last years mattered, but the lost ones mattered too, because waste counts, silence counts, distance counts, and the heart keeps the ledger even when the mind can no longer remember the bill. So here is the truth from a man who took too long to cross 10 feet of grass. A grudge is rarely justice. Most of the time, it is sorrow with its back straight, loneliness pretending to be principle, a wound that begins asking to be honored long after it should have been healed. Wave first, speak first, cross the yard first, because one day a storm will come for a house or a lung or a heart, and when it does, nobody gets extra credit for having protected pride better than love. That is what 90 years taught him, and it taught him late.